This is my ZX10R 2012. This is a real world review with also some of the mods and changes I made to the bike, as well as suspension settings towards the end to help you guys get the thing close to where it should be. When this bike first came out in 2011, it shocked the world. It was the first of the Japanese bikes to compete against the S1000, which just broke the 200 horsepower mark in the year 2009 and 2010. This was the first Japanese bike to come back fighting and break that mark. Since then, the only other bikes that have broken that mark has been the R1 starting in 2015 and the GSX-R 1000 in I believe 2017 or 18 with the variable cam timing. It is the Gen 4 ZX10R, which was made from 2011 to 2015. Pretty much all the same bikes in them years with minor changes mainly to color schemes, but they did also add a electronic steering stabilizer in 2013. But this Gen 4 ZX10 did not only rival the S1000 in the horsepower department, but it also rivaled it in the electronics department as well, with a ABS option and also traction control. Now, I should have mentioned at the beginning of the video, the 200 horsepower mark that this bike made was the European model. The American model came here about 17 horsepower short of that because of EPA restrictions on noise that caused the secondary throttle valves. In the tune, they would set the secondary throttle valves to close off the intake track some so that not as much noise would come out of the intake above, I believe, like 10,000 RPMs. However, all you have to do is either get a European ECU or send your ECU out to someone like Gull or Brock's and have it reflashed. And then you'll get the full 200 horsepower or just above 200 horsepower. I would suggest the reflash option. Not only is it cheaper, but also they can flash it for whatever tunes you might have. Like if you have exhaust on it or intake air filter on it, things of the such. They can also make it where certain settings, like whatever power mode you choose, you can choose it while you're actually riding the bike instead of having to come to a dead stop. Another key advantage of having it flash is they can raise the rev limiter. The rev limiter of this bike is set at 14 stock. However, with the tune, they can raise the 14 and a half or even as much as 1475, just, whatever your preference is. So if you have the American model, you're going to have to send it off the ECU to get it reflashed or buy European ECU to get the full 200 horsepower, but the bike's capable of it, and that's the point. But the beauty of this bike is since it is they've been making this bike since 2011 to 2015, and we are now in 2019 as I'm making this video, you can pick these up at a fairly reasonable price used and still be competitive with what's being offered from these brand new bikes coming out in 2019. They're not really making any more horsepower than this today. They have refined some of the electronics, and some of the suspension stuff has gotten a little bit trickier, I guess you can say. But overall, it's going to be about the same experience. You can't get that in 2011 from, let's say, the CBR 1000 or even the R1. They were a little bit down in the performance area, especially in the motor area and the electronics, but you could from the ZX10. Speaking of electronics, this one has the ABS option. I find the ABS option does make the initial bite a little bit softer on the brakes, probably because the brake lines have to be a little bit longer, the plumbing and stuff, to run through the solenoids and everything that controls the ABS. But you get used to that pretty quick, and on the street, it's awesome. I don't ride this thing at the track. I save all my track time for motocross. But I can tell you on the street, the ABS is definitely worth its weight in gold. Rainy days, you don't have to worry as much. I purposely tested the rear brake by stomping it in the rain. It definitely works. The front brake, I tested it on accident. Tires were cold, grabbed too much front brake, and I felt a little bit of a pulsation at the lever as the ABS was doing its thing. So it's definitely worth it. Traction control, the traction control is pretty nifty, especially if you get caught in the rain. You got 3 levels of traction control to choose from. You have, if you look closely, there's level 1. Then we have level 2, level 3, and off. Whenever I hit rain, I turn it on, at least level 1. If it's really raining, I'll go ahead and stick it on level 3. It definitely works. I can give it as much throttle as I want in the rain and not have to worry about the rear end peeling out. It's kind of nice. Come out of a red light, I can take off as quick. I can give it as much throttle, take off as quick as I think I can. Cleanly leaving all the cars behind in the rain. Back wheel never slides out. So that definitely works. And then you got power modes, but who really uses these things? I know I don't. But you have full power right there. There's medium and there's low. I've tested it. It definitely works, but I don't use it. One other nice little feature the gauge has here is it has what they call track erase mode. If you put it right here in this setting and you press and hold, you'll see the speedometer turns into a gear gauge. That will tell you what gear you're in now. And your miles per hour is written right there much smaller, as well as you can run your lap time counter right there. So, you know, you have that as an option. I'm going to go ahead and stick it back on the regular mode now. And as you saw the tachometer, it's got this, no longer do you have the digital tachometer. I mean the analog that, now you have this light. That's what it looks like when it's fully lit up. The shift light will look like that. I have my shift light set at 14, as you can see, even though my rev limiter is set at 14.5. And I have it set to blink quick. It's a weird, you get used to it. At first it's definitely weird, you know, I kind of like looking at that needle, you know, go across, but I've found that this is better in the long run because when I'm sitting on the bike and riding, no longer am I looking down at the needle anymore or being amused by the needle. I'm looking where I'm supposed to, where I'm going. I use my peripheral vision to pay attention to tack. I can see as it just kind of goes across. I can tell when it's getting close and then it just starts blinking. I know it's time to shift. So I found it to be more functional in the real world once you get used to it. It just takes a little bit to get used to it. Oh, by the way, the mirrors are awesome on this bike. No more looking at your shoulders. They're nice and wide, as you can see, low and far up front. No more looking at your shoulders. I can see the cars clearly behind me and the cars just behind me to the left or the right. These are the best mirrors I've ever had on a bike, bottom line. So how does the power feel? It feels very, very long. Again, this has been reflashed by Goal. The rev limiter is set at 14.5, and it's a little bit flat feeling. Between like 4 and 8. By 9, it's coming in. By 10, it's in hard. By 12, it's all the way in. And then it just pulls hard and fast all the way to 14.5. I don't even know the rev limiter's coming. It doesn't start running short of steam. It doesn't start getting soft. It doesn't act like it's running out of breath. It's just pulling. All of a sudden, boom, 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 the rev limiter. It's perfect. Very strong top end bike. It runs like a race bike. Now the mods that I have on this bike to take advantage of this motor is a K&N air filter, although I'm debating on swapping out for a BMC race filter. The Two Brothers exhaust system that removes the cat, so there's no catalytic converter or butterfly valve, and the reflash, the Gull reflash on the ECU, and that's really the only mods I have. The gearing, stock gearing is very, very long. It uses a 17 tooth in the stock is 17 in the front and 39 in the back. It makes it where first gear goes to about 118 or 15 or whatever miles per hour before you smack off the rev limiter. It's just way too long. It makes it where you have to feather the clutch a lot, also from a dead stop. Although your 6th gear interstate cruise is nice with the stock gearing, but it makes round town just boring. I played with a lot of gearing. I swapped sprockets down this thing till I was blue in the face. Here's what I found that works best for me. I found just dropping the front to a 16 and leaving the back with a 39 stock. It allows first gear to pull nice and easy from a dead stop. It comes into the power band sooner with more torque. It also allows the highway cruise to be acceptable. And what I mean by acceptable, I have a general rule that a motor, car, or bike should never cruise at RPM more than halfway of its rev limiter. So if the rev limiter of this bike is 14 stock, then halfway would be 7. I should never be cruising more than 7,000 RPMs for a long period of time. At 7,000 RPMs with the gearing that I've chosen, I'm doing an indicated 95 miles per hour, which is the actual 90 miles per hour. I don't really ever expect to cruise more than 90 miles per hour for an extended period of time. So that's perfect. Much like the 355 gearing in the Mustang world was the best of both worlds, I would say your 1639 combination on this is the best of both worlds. Another beauty of this gearing is it brings the rear axle a little bit closer to the back if you don't change the links of the chain. On this bike, you definitely always want this rear axle from the midway point of its adjustment range or further back. You don't want it in front of that, and I'll explain why when I get into the chassis adjustment in a minute. We all know Kawasaki and its dead headlight look when it's on low beam. It sucks. The problem with this is you always have people asking you, hey, or telling you, hey, you got a headlight out. Another thing too is that one headlight is not very bright on the street. I wasn't impressed. Especially in the past, I owned a 05 R1, had amazing headlights. This one was nothing in comparison. So what I did was I took the high beam and I adjusted it. I took it and I adjusted it lower. You see there's the low, there's the high. You see where the high is at when I turn it on? It's no higher than the low beam is. So I adjusted the high beam lower so that it stays out of people's eyes. You'll see as I come down lower here, boom, they both come in bright at the same time. I don't have anyone flashing their lights at me. It's not bothering people on the road. I leave it like that day and night. I have much better visibility at night, and people see me much better in the daytime. So just remember, you can adjust these headlights. Take your time, adjust them in, find that sweet spot, and turn on both your lights. It'll be safer. Yes, I know I'm using jack stands to hold the bike up. I do have real bike stands. It's just easier for me to get it on these jack stands when I'm by myself. I'm also missing the stomp pad on this side. You see it on that side. It fell off a couple days ago riding. I have one coming in, another one coming in. Before this bike, I owned a 08 ZX10R. And then before that, I owned a 06 ZX10R. So I'm not new to ZX10s. I've chosen them for my last 3 bikes because you kind of get the most for your money with these bikes. You definitely get usually the strongest motors, and you get good suspension, good handling. They're just great bikes to go with. There's other good bikes out there. You know, I enjoyed my R1 experience. The Gixxers make some good bikes, but you know, you can't go wrong with the Kawasaki. And if you just purchase one, get some good tires. Man, a little bit of money spent in tires can go a long way. Just get some good rubber on it. It can save your ass, save your bike. It's worth it. When I first bought the bike, man, you know, it was definitely a ZX10R, but my previous one was all dialed in, tuned in. My 08 had a full dyno tune, all the bolt-on suspension was set up. And even though this one had a really strong motor and it revved out really far and wide, it just didn't handle like my 08 did, so I had to address that. One of my biggest complaints about this bike out the box is head shake. It definitely shook its head, especially under full throttle, at the end of first gear, when you go to shift into second gear. If you're on a bumpy road, things of the such can cause it to get into a little bit of a head shake. It would never go quite into a full-on tank slapper because the stabilizer would keep it in check, but it would definitely shake it. And as you know, it's hard to steer a bike when it's shaking or directed. This steering stabilizer, even though it's an Öhlins, it has been valved on the soft side by Kawasaki's request so that people wouldn't crank it all the way in and the steering would be too slow and then they could have lawsuits on their hand or whatever. Basically, it's all in the needle right here. They have a hole that's drilled to the needle, blah, blah, blah. What I found, just crank it all the way in. Full stiffness. Don't even try loosening it up. Just full stiffness is good enough. Any less is not enough. Crank it full stiffness. If yours is old, pull this off every so often and feel it. Make sure there's no air bubbles or anything of the such. If yours is old and you're starting to get air bubbles getting loose, Have the fluid in it changed while you're at it. You can have it revalved if you want, but it's not necessarily necessary. Just keep it fully cranked in with some good fluid, and that should be good enough. And for you guys that don't know or haven't ridden a leader bike, yes, these bikes can do wheelies anywhere up to about 120 miles per hour under their own power without even helping them. They're amazingly fast bikes. And because of that, they need very good suspension and setup. Oh, by the way, I picked this thing up on eBay for like 30 bucks. Got rid of the seat cover on it. Check them out. But so now we're going to get the suspension settings. I don't know if I mentioned it earlier. I'm big into MX. I've been doing suspension work in motocross for pretty much most of my life. I'm very in tune with my suspension because of motocross. Even though I don't road race, the motocross experience is definitely it's definitely shown itself even just on the street riding that I do. So here's what this is. Here's the settings that I would suggest if you're clueless and you don't have your bike set up, and you still have stock components, meaning you still have the stock shock, stock forks, and you haven't had it resprung or revalved or anything of such. It's a stock bike, right? This is the settings that I would start with, and then change them at that point to your liking. But start with this and see what you think. Let me know. You can always shoot me an email, send me a comment. All right, first off, most importantly, rider sag, the rear sag. Take a moment, if you don't understand how to set the sag, Google it and learn the difference between static sag and racer sag. Static sag is under the bike's own weight. Racer sag is when the rider is, or rider sag is when the rider is sitting on the bike. I like this, on this bike I found that the static sag is best at about 10 millimeters. That's with no one on the bike. The bike under its own weight, the rear wheel will, or the rear end will sag just 10 millimeters versus if the back wheel is completely in the air and the rear end was fully extended. Anywhere between 9 to 11 is acceptable. I found 10 to be the sweet spot for me. At my weight, 160 pounds, it puts my rider sag or race sag with me sitting on the bike at 22 millimeters. Rider race sag on this bike is best between 20 to 25 millimeters. And static sag is best between 9 to 11 millimeters. So if you can set that up where both of them fly somewhere within that range, you're going to be good. If you're way too heavy, it might take a stiffer spring to get to that. If you're way too light, it might take a softer spring. But you should be able, most people should be able to find, get into that range. As I say in motocross, static sag is almost everything. It means a lot to the bike. The static sag set right. If you don't have anyone around to help you, just set the the static sag to 10 millimeters right on. Go out and ride the bike. If it feels too stiff or too tall, lower it down to 11. If it feels too low still or too soft still, then bring it up to 9, and that should do you. Now let's get on to the settings. Compression on the rear right here. There's a 12 millimeter nut and a flathead. You want to turn the 12 millimeter all the way in and then back it out exactly 2 turns. Then you take the flathead here. That's your low speed compression. You turn it all the way in and then back it out just 2 turns. And that should be right on for the most part. Again, you'll fine tune it yourself to find something slightly better, but this is like a good starting point. This is in my opinion, these are the settings that this bike should have came with stock. The rebound is in this little hole on the frame here. If you look in the hole just to your left, you'll see a flathead. Just turn it all the way in until it's lightly seated and stop. Unfortunately, the shock was valved from the factory with very, very little rebound dampening, and that's what it takes to actually get enough rebound dampening that this bike still handles correctly. So just turn it all the way until the bottom's out lightly and stop. And that's good enough for street use, for heavy aggressive street use at that. Fork heights and the clamps. From the top of the fork tube, not the red cap, just the black fork tube, to the top of the triple clamp here, this area right here, should be 5 millimeters from the top right there to the top of the triple clamp. 5 millimeters. Set that on both sides to that, from there to there. 5 millimeters on both sides of the bike. On the preload, down here, the spring preload, turn this all the way out. You want this on full soft. Do it on the other side as well. All the way out, full soft. The compression on the forks, right here, it says compression. You want to turn that all the way in, and then turn it out 2.5 turns, 2.5 turns, both forks. On the tension, or rebound, it's a rebound, but they call it tension on these. Turn it all the way in, and then turn out just 3 turns. And that will pretty much get you right on. You'll be amazed at what the bike feels like with that setting versus stock, I promise you. It's going to feel much more aggressive. The back end, see, stock, they had the rider sag at like 35 millimeters with me on it. Stock, it's way too low. I got it set at 22 now. Stock, the bike would just put all the weight on the back end, on the throttle, and the front end would get a little light, and the head would just shake. Now it's like you get on the gas, you whoop, it just kind of, a little pitch, slight little pitch, but it stays level, like a race bike. That's how they should be. And then when you're heavy on the brakes, the forks can handle what you're giving it. Has nice, good, sharp steering. Overall, much better handling, perfect for the street, for aggressive street riding, that is. So try that out, see what you think, let me know. I hope you guys enjoyed the review. Oh, by the way, if I didn't cover this, when you're setting the rear rider sag, for those of you that don't know, it's adjusted to the spring right here, these 2 collars. You can use a long punch and a big flathead to adjust these. You know, just use a long, or you can use a spanner wrench, but it's a little bit hard to get in here. I found a long punch and a flathead like we do in the motocross world. It gets it done. Oh, one more thing I forgot to add. One of the nice things about this bike is you never have to worry about a speedo healer with the ABS and everything and such. The speedometer is always right no matter what gearing you put it, no matter what gearing changes you make. Well, it's right within reason. What I mean by that is it is about 5 miles per hour off. It will always read about 5 miles per hour higher than what you're really doing. And there's nothing that I know of as of yet to fix that. It's just kind of how it is, and you just get used to it. But otherwise, you can just change the gearing. You don't have to worry about getting a speedo healer. The speedometer is basically 6% off. So at an indicated 100 miles per hour, you're actually only doing 94 miles per hour. But if you just use a general rule of thumb, you're doing 5 miles per hour less than what it actually reads, and you should be okay. So there it is. It's a great bike. I love it. I enjoy it. I'm going to get geared up and go take it for a ride. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, shoot me a question in the comments or whatever, and take it easy.